There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul.
I am so glad to welcome internationally known countertenor Reginald Mobley to the studios here at WRTI. Welcome, Reggie.
Thank you,
I'm
man.
so glad you're here. We haven't seen each other in a while.
It's been a while. I think maybe London was the last time I saw you.
I think so. We were both going our to different gigs,
Different
but
gigs,
both in the city at the same time.
rehearsing at the same spot.
In the same spot with competing ensembles who shall not be named.
Nope.
Nope, not at all. Okay, Reggie, we are talking about how fantastic you are. But I read in your bio that you were going to be a visual artist. In fact, you had a scholarship to know, like Davidson College. Like that,
In North
pretty
Carolina.
prestigious. But here you are, singing
Here I
around the
am,
world.
a
Give us the
failed
Reader's
artist.
Digest. Oh, stop. Not even.
So my high school in Gainesville, I was raised in Gainesville, Florida. Buchholz High School was a magnet school for drafting and architecture, and I was in that program. And because I needed something to do during the summers, I took art classes during the summer. And so my last 2 years of high school, I also added AP art courses. So so I had 2 AP art courses plus drafting, and then a keyboard, and then of course your normal general classes. And my senior year, my brother was a freshman and he joined the chorus. And the chorus teacher, who was also the keyboard teacher, in the South, you can't get boys to sing in choir. So she asked herself, well, if one of the brothers can sing, maybe the other can as well. So she had me sing for her in her office and said, okay, you are dropping one of your art courses. And so I picked up high school choir my last year. She basically loved what I was doing. She helped me get voice lessons my senior year. She actually paid for them. And I decided that I was really falling in love with singing. So we basically applied for an art scholarship, which I got with Davidson. But at the last minute, we applied at another school, HBCU in Huntsville, Alabama, Oakwood College. And Oakwood, at the last minute, they accepted my application and also offered me kind of a matching scholarship in music. So I went to Oakwood College, now university, on a trumpet performance scholarship.
Come on.
I didn't touch the trumpet a single day. I immediately switched to voice and started training as a tenor. Didn't really care for that. It was a little difficult. And I also missed home. I missed Florida. So I went back to Gainesville, and that's kind of where I was discovered by my teacher, discovered that I could sing alto and had me switch to countertenor, and then everything is basically gone from there.
Amazing. And that's another connection we have because Ron LaFawn was a Michigan grad. And so,
Right.
okay, so that's pretty amazing, right? Trumpet scholarship, then singing. And then you had a really wonderful and long-term relationship with Seraphic Fire. Did that come out of Florida State? How did that
It
happen?
actually came out of working for Tokyo Disney.
I love it.
So I sang in a barbershop quartet at University of Florida, Station 59. You can even you can YouTube them.
Love it.
And we won the international collegiate competition. And because of that, there was this listserv of past winners. And the group that was going to Tokyo, to Disney, found my name. I went with them to Japan, where I lived in Tokyo for 2.5 years, singing and acting at Tokyo Disney. And our second contract, the bass, Joel Diffendafer, sang with Chanticleer earlier in his career. And Chanticleer happened to be touring in Japan at the time. And so he's like, well, you should come sing and meet the guys. And there I met Ian Howell. And when Ian left Chanticleer to attend Yale, he was singing with Seraphic Fire in their early, third season. And there happened to be a concert that he couldn't do, which were Bach motets. And he suggested to Patrick that I replace him. So Patrick and I talked. At the time, I was now at Florida State, and after the weekend, he said, "Well, you should come down and sing Bach with us." And then so spring of 2006, I joined Seraphic Fire, and that was it was the beginning of everything. I mean, it led to us meeting. It led to everything from there.
Right. That's pretty great. I love that. So, Because was recorded in 2021.
Yes.
We are coming out of the pandemic.
Yes.
Which was it was a terrible time for everybody, but it was a really difficult, hard time for singers. Talk to us about what that was like to be recording at that time.
It was kind of crazy the way it all happened. I mean, so Alpha Classics had contracted me to record this album or an album with them in 2019. And so in 2020, after the lockdown began, I got a call from the head of Alpha Classics, Didier Martin. Wonderful person, incredible person. And I thought that, well, because of lockdown, he's canceling the contract. We won't be doing this anymore. And he actually went the opposite direction. He doubled down completely and said, I want to do this recording with you, but I want to try something different. At the time, the plan had been to just record an album of spirituals and the music of Black composers of the past 300 years. So that would have included, of course, Florence Price and William Grant Still, but also like Xavier St. George, Nunez Garcia, and Ignacio Sancho. But he decided that instead of partnering me with a classical pianist on the label, he wanted to partner me with a jazz pianist that he knew, who had recorded with Alpha, Baptiste Trottignon, incredible jazz pianist, French jazz pianist, and said, let's see what happens with you two together. So over the course of the lockdown, we met over Zoom and tried like playing with each other terribly, but after a while we figured out that what we should do is I would send him a list PDFs of various spirituals and music of Black American composers, and then he would decide which melodies he really liked and what he thought he could do something with, and basically came up with the idea of taking these spirituals and melodies of non-idiomatic music of art songs of Black American composers, and treat them the way we treat Cole Porter or Jerome Kern, treat them like jazz standards, kick the tires on these melodies and test the resilience and the beauty that exists within the creativity of the Black mind, the Black soul. And so once we saw we had an album, we met. I went to Paris for a couple of weeks in October of 2021, and masked up. Everything was still crazy, but I would just take the metro, hiding in the mask, get to Salle Cologne, and then we would, over a couple of days, we recorded the whole thing. As a matter of fact, I think in the second day of recording, Didier decided, well, I think we should do something more. Have you sung Marvin Gaye before? Have you sung Heard Through the Grapevine? It was like, no. I mean, I know it, obviously, but I haven't sung it. It's like, well, let's try it. And so we just laid it down that day and just added that to the album. And it was just such an organic and spontaneous process. And so you hardly even thought about the fact that it was coming out of such a horrible lockdown, but it was just a really kind of bright spot in that time. And and I was, of course, super worried because, as you know, like coming out of the pandemic after having your technique completely modified by singing through masks and not having the endurance of traveling and singing and traveling and singing, I was super worried, but everything just locked in for this.
I mean, it sounded like a meeting of two minds that were meant to come together. It really does. And I'm glad you touched on several things that I was going to ask you about, which was the process. Like, it sounds like you had an idea that you wanted to focus on spirituals and music of Black Americans, but I wondered if there were pieces specifically that you really were hoping to have, or really like, this is the heart of the recording to me, or was it more of an overall?
Well, there were a couple of things that ended up being sort of linchpins for both Baptiste and myself in this. Like, the thing that I think is amazing about this album is that it's classical and it's jazz, but it's neither. It really doesn't allow itself to fit into one box, which is part of kind of my whole philosophy behind music, and even behind being a Baroque musician, is the idea that music should not be limited and walled in, and then that's something that I thought was great. And so having a white French jazz pianist who had no, he didn't really know these songs or spirituals very well, except for maybe a couple, hearing a jazz musician come to the the source of his own style. I mean, spirituals is early music. I mean, it very much is the beginning of not just jazz, but it was it influenced classical music as well. Like so much came from this that it was a great chance to see how this music could live and evolve and transform and find new life in every space. And so he was particularly taken by Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. And for me, it was actually Harry Burleigh's art song Gene, which I was most taken by because we all know, growing up as American, as a Black American particularly, we are always singing spirituals, and particularly Harry Burleigh's spirituals, because he's kind of the dean of it. Like he's who Dvorak, met
Worked
and
with,
yeah,
learned
exactly,
from.
learned from, and to hear his just a general art song written by a random, Frank Stanton, a white poet and lyricist. Um, I thought it was a beautiful song, but the moment Baptiste like was inspired by what he heard in this music, which French impression. I mean, it was Satie. I mean, basically, and singing through that for the first time, I was just like, well, goodness. I mean, we could just do 5 albums of this, could just volume one, really,
Right.
of the complete songbook.
Yeah.
But it was things like that that kind of anchored the album, and everything just kind of flowed in and out of that.
That's wonderful. I also read that, well, and you touched on this by talking about, is it DDA?
DDA.
Who set up the idea of introducing you to a jazz pianist. Now, I know that you have experience in the jazz idiom. I know you've done concerts with like Alex Wyman, who's brilliant, brilliant, full stop, brilliant keyboardist and has a jazz background, but really strongly, you know, embedded in early music. This was a bit different, right? So, I mean, when DDA proposed that as an idea, what was your first thought? Like, tell us how that felt.
Well, my first thought was, well, can't do what I planned. So I guess we're doing this now. But it was, I mean, I loved it. I mean, those little musical Food Network challenges that that are sometimes thrown your way, I absolutely thrive on things like that because, I've grown up surrounded by jazz and gospel and things like that, and it's always been a part of me. But I never thought anyone would take it seriously, in the classical sphere, especially starting a relationship with a label like Alpha Classics. I thought the typical course of, meal plan is you do something traditional, like Baroque music, our cantatas, our art songs, or lieder or something, and then you kind of let your hair down and do something that's close to your heart. Like you'll do your spiritual album after you've done your Strauss and Bellini. Like,
Right.
but he wanted to start where I started, and I thought that it was really thoughtful, and perhaps that's why the album has been fairly successful, is because it's honest, it's genuine, and that means the world to me because that's what I care about is honesty, and integrity with coming within music. I can't do something I don't believe in, and for him to take that leap of faith and just suggest that I do something that really kind of hits on everything that has mattered to me in my background is just, I know, it was wonderful, really wonderful.
And it worked. It did.
That was the other thing. It actually worked
Yeah.
because we didn't know if that would happen either.
Right. But you took a leap of faith as well because this is your first solo album. I mean, you have recorded, this is your second Grammy nomination. So we should mention that. American Originals
American Originals
with Agave,
Agave.
was nominated as well. And that was focused on composers of Black and Hispanic heritage, North and South America, correct? So that was a great album as well. but a collaborative, collaborative effort with Agave
And another pandemic project.
and another pandemic project. Wow. So talk to us about the differences between those two pandemic projects. I mean, the affect, right?
With American Originals with Agave, I mean, there still was a bit of melding because we have a period ensemble, a period ensemble, performing 19th and 20th century music of Black composers. I mean, Florence Price and Scott Joplin are on that album,
Hmm.
featured heavily, but arranged for a period ensemble and a countertenor.
Right.
So it's just the blurring of lines that I think makes these things work, at least for me. And so we thought about this concert. It happened. We performed it, the Tucson Chamber Music Festival, in January of 20, before the lockdown. And because of the lockdown, and honestly, after the murder of George Floyd, and all of the things that happened to innocent Black people at that time, uh, they thought that this would be the time to really make a statement because the keyboardist Henry Lebedinsky, who is actually a very often we work together as recital partners, and he's an incredible and dear friend. Uh, he and I were talking about it and the idea that this was a time to really say something on behalf of people of color in classical music and showing that if you look at 400 years of classical Western European classical music in the Americas, it didn't all come from the pen of a bewigged white person. Like it was these were women, these were people of color, Hispanic and Black and queer people as well. I mean, there's so much color in music, and we've whitewashed it and straightwashed it for years, for centuries. And this was kind of the opening salvo to make way for showing that the canon is not what we have been led to believe for so long. Well, we allowed it to be tightened and pressed in a way that we thought, well, it's only Beethoven, it's only Bach, it's only Haydn. And since then, everyone is seeing that no, it's actually so much more. I mean, Philadelphia Orchestra is been championing Price. I mean, Handel and Haydn Society, with my role with as the programming consultant there, we've been really moving out of the typical rotation of the four seasons of Haydn and Mendelssohn and Bach, and doing more, of adding Isabel Leonarda and Iglesias Sancho and Esteban Salas. So it's all of this is to say that because of these projects that happened in the pandemic, there's a new lease on life possible for classical music by looking at the fact that there is so much more that sits behind this very narrow idea of what we've seen for so long that has yet to be revealed. And I think we're finally heading there.
I love what you're saying. And I want to touch on a little bit more what you were talking about with the spirituals and American early music, because I know this is something that's very dear to you. And it's probably not a concept that many people are familiar with. And yet, right?
And
Then you're talking about whitewashing and straightwashing of the repertoire. And when we program things, we look at a lot of the music from the 40s and the 50s, and things were happening. Things were starting to happen. Florence Price, Margaret Bonds, the Harlem Renaissance, and then something happened, right? But before that, as you were talking about with the spirituals, can you talk to us a little bit about what you mean there by American early music and the relationship?
well, that idea came to me actually with the project before American Originals with Agave. So American Originals is my third kind of solo feature with them specifically. The first was the music of Isabel Leonarda,
Right.
and the second was Peace in Our Time, and it was to be released in 2018, which was the 400-year anniversary of the beginning of the 30 Years' War. And it somehow there was a moment where I realized that, oh my goodness, like 1618 began the 30 Years' War, which was a time of absolute horror in Europe, and particularly in the area we know of as Germany. And 1 year later, the very first slave ships hit Jamestown. The beginning of slavery in America begins just a year later. And at the same time as Schütz and Zella and the early Bachs were writing and dealing with and processing this grief and horror through music, in Europe, my ancestors were in fields doing the exact same thing with music. I mean, spirituals were being sung and developed in fields at the same time as Bach was writing, as Handel was writing. It's not just early American music, but it is early music, period. And it very much belongs and deserves the same respect as Bach and Handel. I reject the very notion of ethnomusicology, and where for so long things like that have been more or less pushed in that direction. But truly, even outside of what spirituals led to in America, with jazz, barbershop, ragtime, everything, house music, everything, it also influenced Dvorak. It influenced Delius. It influenced Stravinsky. It influenced so much of classical music was very much influenced by this music as well. And so I think it's important to show that not only has this music always had a seat at the table of Western classical of canon, um, I think it's important to notice that it's because of that that there is a potential to see the connection that exists between all of us. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the spirituals and the feeling and the pain and the processing behind that, and look at the same thing when you sing Ach, ich fasse Agneketa, J.C. Bach, and many of the works of Schütz, they were still processing pain and grief. They were doing things that link us emotionally beyond styles, beyond, geographical places. We're all still human. And so because of this music, it links me to Bach as much as it links me to George Walker or Scott Joplin. And it links you in the same way. And it links us together. And to not just us now and us before, but to people that come after us, this is the backstop. This is the guardian of culture and humanity that exists in the arts and music specifically. And I think that's something that I really want to show, at least at this point forward through my career.
I love that, Reggie, and you speak on it so eloquently. And we thank you. Thank you for that. And so that leads me to my next question. What is it that you want people to take away from the album in particular? We were talking about your career writ large, but to go back to Because specifically, because that's what's out in the world newly now. And like I said, as your own project, what is it that you're hoping that people take away?
Well, one, I hope that it kind of really starts to, bring down that wall. That kind of sets classical music apart from the rest of all music. I think it's time to start accepting influences from styles that so long as classical musicians we've considered as other or lesser or not as sophisticated, when in fact it couldn't be further from the truth. I want that to happen. I mean, that's why I love the fact that this album, even though it could be jazz, it could be classical, it's both, it's neither, it can move fluidly through all these spaces. Like this it's being presented, the nomination is in the classical category. And I think that's exactly where it belongs, as well as anywhere else. And I hope that at this point people will, one, stop fearing spirituals.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's time for ensembles, orchestras, and choirs to really start exploring these melodies and these songs, and really consider having more composed and performed in halls, like in the Kimmel Center or Symphony Hall. It deserves a place there. I want to see more of that. And I know that some people will say, well, maybe, it's not quite time because, there's still so much guilt and pain wrapped up in spirituals. Well, it's also a time that we should start really having that conversation as well. We started to in 2020, and then it kind of faded as we found our status quo again. But I think there's still time. I think there's still a need to push that, to really have a conversation and understand that all that we do, especially in the U.S. and America, our music comes from that. And whichever side you may feel you come from, the point is that there is still a space there where a conversation should be had. And I think there is healing that comes to this music. And I think as we start to accept that more and more and more and do this more and more and more, I think it will not only help, all the sides within the classical industry understand and be a little more open, come together more, but I think that everyone outside of being, of classical music or the industry, including, attendees, will see that this is a place where I feel I belong. That a person who who doesn't listen to or care for classical music can see themselves, selves in an advert and see that this is a place where they can be welcome. And I think that they should feel free to just give it a shot, give it a chance, see if there's something they like. That there should never be any barrier imposed, outside or inside, to bar someone from hearing or enjoying or experiencing music.
Amen to that. Yeah. Well, I mean, we agree on that for certain. And I love how eloquently you speak to that. And I think truly that the album does speak to that. We can't lie with our voices, can we?
No.
There's nowhere to hide. And so if you haven't heard Because yet, you should definitely check it out, and you will hear what Reggie is saying through his voice so eloquently as well. And it comes from the heart. And I love that. Yeah. One last practical question, just to bring it back. So second Grammy nomination, feel different this time around? Yeah.
It does feel different this time.
Yeah.
It's a different category. The first American Originals was in Classical Compendium, and this one is
Right.
actually in the solo vocal album category. And I think this time I know I wanted it then. And now I think I want it a little more this time. And it's different because I think it's a chance for a wider group to kind of hear the message that we're kind of going for with this album. Showing that there should no longer be these walls and ideas behind what is and isn't allowed in classical music. And if you have a chance, I mean, more than if getting a Grammy for whatever I've done vocally or for whatever Baptiste has done on the piano, I think if you have the physical album, the liner notes written by Henry Lebedinsky are absolute fire. And everything that I've said is explained so much better by him. I mean, it's an effort to actually not just show that music is art and entertainment, but that it's also service, that it also serves us, serves humanity, and this is a chance to really get that message out there. So I'm really hoping for something good this time around.
And what are you going to wear?
Well, I'm going to be wearing my normal concert black because unfortunately I'll be leading a concert elsewhere.
Oh.
There's another tour of
Okay.
Because that's happening in Belgium.
Okay.
Around that time, but there will be people there
Good.
in my stead,
Okay, good.
and I'm sure, and they'll look much better than I ever would.
Not true. Not true. But I love that, and I'm glad you're taking it on tour. That's really great. I love that. Reggie, this is great.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, I've got two things. One, are you still a basketball fan?
Yes. More of a
Pro
basketball
or
player
college?
fan.
Yeah, well, fair. Yeah. Pro or college?
Still mostly college, but because I'm a Bostonian now, definitely pro as well.
Oh boy, does that mean really the Celtics?
Kind of.
Okay, Philadelphia. Don't hold it against him.
Yeah, please
It's a little
don't hold
tough.
it against me. I love the players from all teams. So.
Who's your favorite current player?
Rudy Gobert.
Okay.
So Minnesota, as opposed
Yeah,
to
exactly.
to Boston or Philadelphia. That
Yeah.
is the safe answer.
That was a safe-ish answer. You haven't been in Philadelphia very long.
I know.
Reggie. But no, it's fair enough.
Well,
Okay.
no one's invited me to any games, so I can't
Oh.
I can't make that decision.
All right. Well, we didn't have such a good outcome last night, so it's probably just as well. You've kind of touched on this, but I would love for you to ask you, people who've made a difference in your life. We've talked a bit about Seraphic Fire. You talked about Henry Lebedinsky. We've talked about Ron, your voice teacher. Anyone else you want to?
Well, I mean, Ron built me. And it was actually my professor at Florida State, Roy Delp, who kind of sculpted me as well. Those two men created something. And I'm hoping I'm not letting them down. I hope to keep that going for as long as possible. They're fantastic. Of course, I can never not mention, my family. My mother is a huge influence. Really, that's a good question. I mean, there have been so many people in my life who've helped me to get where I am today. I mean, even mentioning Kay Alcorn, my chorus teacher from my high school. I am a shining example of the fact that there is no such thing as a self-made man. That if you find me a self-made man, I will find you a liar. It really does. In so many ways, it takes a village, and I respect everyone who's ever, offered me a hand and lifted me up in some way or pushed me in a direction in some way throughout my entire life. And I remember and think of them all, from Mrs. Alcorn and Mrs. Terrell in elementary school, all the way to, to John Elliott Gardner, who's been an extremely great supporter of my career in Europe, to my manager, Catherine, Labrie, who has been an incredible friend. Like, I honor every single relationship I have. So, I mean, it's the only thing I can do is just thank everyone who's ever met me. I mean, just the one person on the street in Boston, my first week there, who actually smiled and looked me in the eye, as opposed to being Boston with me. Even that makes a difference. So, who could I not mention?
Yeah,
MEG BRAGLE. Oh my goodness. My goodness.
Don't know about that.
My first job in a professional baroque ensemble as your cover. I mean, that was
That was back in the day.
back in the day. Only like 2 years ago.
Just
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
we were young and we are still prodigies today. I love it. Reggie, thank you so much
Thank you.
for being with us today. We love having you here. We love the album. As I said to you, we've played it multiple times, and people have called and written in to say how much they loved it or appreciated it, and that is a true story. And that doesn't happen all the time. So that means people were really moved by it. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for
Appreciate
sharing
that.
your
Thank you.
time with us today. You're the best, Reg. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.